Hi everybody, I'm Dana and welcome back to Tuesday Tips for Leaders of Volunteers. This week I'm doing a two-part Tuesday Tips because this is a really big, important topic. So we'll do part one today and get into some of the points of the rewards and risks of starting a youth volunteering program working with kids as volunteers. And then next week, we'll get into the other half, but it's a lot of information. And I do encourage all of you to add in the comments what particular challenges you've had doing or starting up youth volunteer programs. And for those agencies where youth issues or youth working with you is a major part of your organization, mission, and work and cause, great. Put your success stories down below, including your agency website, so others can seamlessly share and learn from the wisdom in the room. So let's get into part one. This is not legal advice. These are my guidelines that I have developed that have helped me start a number of youth organizations or programs or types of volunteer activities with nonprofits and government agencies through the course of my 20 years of career. Check with your own organization legal department for all of this, and if you don't have a legal department and it's a really small nonprofit, you're not organized that way, there are a lot of youth legal advocacy groups and other nonprofits who do know how to do this really well, and absolutely get in touch and do that community partnership outreach to see how people are having success, and even, copy some of their really great solid policies so that we can create an environment for everyone of all ages to feel that they have comfort, convenience, and connection, my 3 C's, in all of the work that they're doing with your organization. So, part one of assessing levels of risk. A lot depends on the age of the kids that you're working with. So are you working with ages 10 or younger, grade school kids? That's going to be a little more challenging on a lot of levels. Are you working with a middle school age or tweens, where that's 11, 12, 13 years old? Or, and this is the most common group of youth or minors that organizations work with, are you working with teenagers who are in high school? And this is the most common age group to have volunteer with organizations for a variety of reasons related to comfort, convenience, connection. One, at least in the United States, and I know in some other parts of the world, high school or teenage schooling is tied to a certain amount of community service to graduate. So this is a group that is actively looking for volunteer opportunities every time the school year starts up again. Secondly, this is a group that has, of someone who's not an adult yet, they have probably, the most emotional intelligence developed, and I'm talking about teenagers, but we've all been teenagers, so we understand, and coordination or judgment or any kind of skill set that needs to be used for the task or the project or the type of activity they're doing. This is a pretty sharp age group because they're developing life skills that they're going to have for their hobbies, interests, career, the rest of their lives. This is a prime time to develop that community connection, that empathy, and how we work in teams or how we lead projects individually to success. So this is really great potential personal and professional development at that age when kids are really starting to think about what their future might hold and what they might want to do as levels of their career. Assess the risk by the type of activity that they'll be doing per their age group. I was working with zoos and outdoor parks, recs organizations for a long time. So there was some real physical risk to handling animals in the education center of a zoo, even the children's zoo with goats knocking kids over, things like that. And for parks and rec agencies, what we had high school age kids do, what we had teenagers do who are 14 to 17, was typically doing land steward work. So working with hand tools and working outside, moving things around, maybe pushing a wheelbarrow, maybe lifting something. It might be hot, it might be cold. Are they indoors? Are they outdoors? And who are they working with? Are they doing an individual project, either at home, remotely, like research or creating something or creating art or an enrichment item for animals or other kids or whatever? Or are they working in a group that is a group of their peers that they already know, like a school or a classroom or a faith group that they pretty much know that crowd already? Or are those kids being put into kind of a randomized group, like a drop-in event where maybe several families or several classes or several faith groups are coming to all do something together, and not everybody knows each other? So that's another piece to think about in a risk assessment of starting up a youth program, of what are those specific activities, tasks, projects going to be available to them, and what's the physical or even emotional risk that goes along with that. Then there's the type of contact and interaction, not only with adults like the public or other volunteers or your paid employees that are working with them, but really you're talking about a few different categories of interactions with adults as being different from who is supervising the kids. So I'm going to break these two thoughts out a little bit. We're all very familiar with the phrase stranger danger. Like, I certainly grew up with that myself, being Gen X and kind of a latchkey kid, but that's still a real possibility. And we want to make sure that there's a policy, a written policy in place for youth, that if they're interacting with the public at an outreach boothing event, or something where they're just mixing with a lot of people they don't know, that either there is a requirement for a parent, guardian, teacher, or some other kind of chaperone from their group to be with them, so that the responsibility of supervising them with interactions with strangers is shared between the group's adult chaperones and your volunteer and adult employees who are leading these activities as well. So it's kind of a shared supervisory responsibility, but having a policy that, yeah, members of the public that kid doesn't know don't get to take them away from the event or isolate them into a specific conversation. Like that should be something to watch out for. If it is a school or church or temple or a community group, like, conservation club or service club, something like that, if people know each other, then there's a different dynamic to maybe be watchful for, which is peer-to-peer bullying. And so making sure that your staff and volunteers understand, do they or do they not have a role in breaking up, seeing someone get bullied or targeted or isolated? How much of that is going to be the responsibility of your organization versus any adults that might already be with the children, and just have that very clearly lined out. Now, again, in an older age group, teenagers, high school age, they could very well be in charge of their own human selves. They could be doing a project remotely, online, again, research or constructing something or being creative, or they could be on a work site with the rest of your volunteers or staff, but they have a little workspace, they have an office, they have a desk they work at. It may or may not be near other people. But again, just being mindful that most laws are going to go in the direction, and most best practices are going to, and guidelines are going to lean towards not letting kids be alone with just one adult at a time that isn't a direct friend or family member that's acting as their guardian. But I've had, high schoolers sit at the desk next to me and my coworkers in a big open office, and they're doing their thing and their project, and they're really in charge of themselves, and they come to me as the volunteer administrator at the time for support or if they need resources, but they're working independently, and that's a great skill to develop. So be careful not to helicopter too much and just be there as support. So I'm going to leave with part one, with a part of the comfort, convenience, connection piece again, and kind of circling back to that. If you're working with older teenagers who are of driving age, that's going to be a lot easier. If they have a car, if they have transportation, that they can get to where they need to go, if they're working at a specific work site or they're going to work with clients, like delivering meals, things like that, that they have that level of independence and that you allow that level of trust that they can get themselves to and from places. It's pretty rare, not unheard of, but it's very rare for agencies to get legal clearance for teenagers to do driving for them. Typically, workers' comp and insurance companies for the agency want drivers to be 21 and over, or at least in some states 18 and over. So again, these are things that may not already be on your checklist, but depending on what you want volunteers to do for you, especially if they're like using a car running errands, we're thinking about mileage, we're thinking about insurance coverage, we're thinking about safety, it's less likely a 16 or 17-year-old would be cleared to do that, but that's just something to keep in mind in that comfort, convenience connection. So that's part one for today. Again, this is a lot. Please share in the comments challenges, ideas, success stories if you do this kind of stuff all the time, what worked for you, what problems you ran into. And in part two, we're going to dig deeper into some data and statistics around safety for kids individually and in groups and the kind of works they're doing, and also talk more about who in your agency, paid or unpaid on your team, should have background checks and should, teens can't get background checks themselves as minors. We can't run a background check on a kid, but it's important to have that as one of your pillars of safety. We're also going to get into how that can be a barrier and a bias for people, and it may accidentally exclude people with assumptions about their demographic or their background where they actually would be a really great volunteer for this role. And then we'll get into kind of some more policy stuff and how to set up different situations for prevention and response if something happens. But for me personally, the reward of being a volunteer as a teenager and then having that build into a pretty major step in my career was so important. And I have such great, amazing memories of those times. And that's what we want to create for kids in any sort of interaction with our agency. Again, as volunteers, as clients, as participants, as advocates, is we're helping create great experiences and wonderful memories to influence their values and their life choices going forward. So we'll see you here next week for part two of our rewards and risks working with youth volunteers. Take care.